Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about the Protection Paladin in World of Warcraft Burning Crusade Classic. Specifically what I want to talk about here is Wowhead's Burning Crusade pre-raid and tier 4 phase 1 best in slot lists and how they're awful, quite plainly. In fact, they're so bad that if someone was handing me a piece of paper with these items and enchants, recommendations of enchants, gems, and all that. If someone was handing me a piece of paper, I would tear it in half, burn the pieces, and throw the ashes down the toilet. It's trash. It's horrible, and I have to wonder, what was the person who wrote this guide thinking about? Was he thinking about like trying to reach a certain level of gearing, a certain level of survivability or threat, or was he just throwing a bunch of random items without any real thought process behind how their character would look like at 17, wearing all of that, and what kind of stats that character would have? Because it really does seem to me like throwing random gear together on this list is the play, was the play. And many of them, many choices don't make sense. And there's also some pretty big omissions as well when it comes to it. Now, some people recommended to me that I should be more reasonable. I shouldn't be toxic when making this video. Fair enough. And I agreed with that until I noticed something that made it clear to me how little effort was actually put in this pre-raid best in slot list. So, Cloak, Devil Shark Cape, no problem there. It is pre-raid best in slot. It is good. But what's the issue? Recommended BiS Cloak enchant. Enchant Cloak, Steel Weave. Now, the first problem is, why would you have a Cloak enchant that grants you defense rating when you've put together a best in slot gear list pre-raid that already has more than enough defense? There's a dodge rating Cloak enchant, and failing that, there's an agility Cloak enchant that can help you more because you need the avoidance. But here's the best part of all of this. Enchant Cloak Steel Weave. I was kind of curious about that. Where is Steel Weave from? Well, let's check WoWWiki. Formula Enchant Cloak Steel Weave is dropped by Priestess Delrissa of Magister's Terrace in both normal and heroic difficulty modes. It's worth saying, for those of you who have never played Burning Crusade, Magister's Terrace comes out with Sunwell Plateau. So a person who wrote a guide for Wowhead, the front page on the internet for World of Warcraft, pretty much, couldn't bother checking what their Cloak enchant actually dropped from. That tells me everything I need to know. And that's only part of it. The list shows a lack of understanding of what a prop paladin is going to be dealing with in raids and even heroic dungeons, what the priorities are for them, gearing wise, and also many other problems. It's a mess. It's simply a mess. So let's go over that. Before I actually talk about the gear list, let's actually go over those priorities. For start, the raid role of a prop paladin. Many people will say, oh, you're a trash tank, you're an AoE tank. Now, I fairly disagree with that. But even if we take that as face value, even if I was for a second to agree with that notion, which I don't, even if we see that, you still need to focus on your survivability versus your threat. Because if you don't focus on your survivability, the trash in Karazhan, the trash in Gruul, the trash in Mag, the ads and Mag, let alone the trash in SSC and TK, they will eat you alive. Your priority is staying alive and being able to tank as many things as possible. That's the main reason a prop paladin is brought to the raid. That was always the main reason. Being able to tank multiple targets. And the more survival you have, the more comfortable you are with that survivability, the more you can pull, the faster you can do the raid. So even if we take the idea that prop paladin's only job in a raid is to tank trash, it's still a bad list even from that perspective, because it doesn't focus on what's important for a prop paladin. Everything in the beta that we have so far indicates this, that survival is a much bigger concern than fret. The only times I've had fret issues in the beta is when DPSers go completely crazy right from the start. And that's more of a burst fret issue anyway than a sustained fret issue, regardless. But beyond that, prop paladins can do more than that. Focusing on survivability is important, at least initially, and especially with the pre-raid best in slot list, because you want to be able to tank bosses. You want to be able to, and you can, get to a position where you don't have to do Karazhan with 2 tanks. Where a prop paladin, it handles his gearing, his consumables, his rotation well enough that he or she can solo tank Karazhan, right? And you can do that. The only times where you might need some help would be on Morose, maybe, and certainly on Netherspite. The Fury Warrior can help with that, the Feral Druid, but everything else, you can solo tank in Karazhan. There is no reason whatsoever. You can handle every boss, their damage. And point the fact, many of the trash that you were supposedly the best tank for, and that's your only role in the raid, much of the trash actually hits just as hard, if not harder in some situations, than certain raid bosses at the very least. Even all the way up to Prince and Nightbane. That's something you need to know. Things hit hard. Survival is a concern. Fret isn't. Fret is fine. And with that in mind, here are your gearing priorities. Crit immunity to get 490 defense. That's what crit immunity requires. You can make do with less if you have resilience on your gear. But usually you want to get 490 defense. And not more if you can avoid it. Because you also want the crush cap. The crush cap is 102.4% avoidance. But that's with Holy Shield. From gear and baseline avoidance, you need 67.07% avoidance. So that's miss, dodge, parry, and block. And then you need Holy Shield with the Libram, the Badge of Justice Libram, to be crush cap. Because that Holy Shield with that Libram is 35.33%. So that's what you need. Then, effective health, where stamina for a prop paladin is more important than armor. Usually people will say armor and stamina are about the same. Not for prop paladins. The reason is prop paladins start out with the lowest HP of all the tanks. We scale very well with HP. Blizzard has given us talents for that: Sacred Duty, Combat Expertise. But what it means, if we don't gear for it, if we don't stack stamina, we will have the lowest survivability of any tank. So we need to stack stamina. And then finally, after you worry about all of that, then you worry about fret. And the stat you care about fret, the only stat you care about fret when it comes to fret, is spell power. And here are the issues of the Wowhead pre-raid and tier 4 best in slot lists. It prioritizes fret over survival, not necessarily by a huge amount, but it does still prioritize fret. It has choices that are meant for fret purposes. And they might be useful in certain situations, but overall, the mentality present in these lists is one of a focus on fret over survivability. Also seems to value block value for whatever reason, but that's a different discussion. Then the gear choices that are picked are very random and odd. Like, there are good pieces mixed with really bad pieces, or pieces that many people wouldn't really consider. And the kind of pieces that are on those lists and the way they're listed is just weird as well. And then finally, the pieces that are best in slot especially, many of them are unreasonable, as in some of them require quite a bit of a few badges of justice or high exalted reputations in one case, or they're really expensive, which is not reasonable for pre-raid gearing, because you're going to do Karazhan likely on the same day, if not shortly after you get to 70. That's not enough time to make the crafted gear, to get the primal nether, to farm primals in general for those kind of gear. You're going to do Karazhan very quickly. Because Karazhan, even with the pre-nerf that we still haven't tested it on the beta, Karazhan, or at least a portion of it, shouldn't be that hard. So making a pre-raid pre-raid list, especially with the kind of choices that are on there, is unreasonable and, frankly, in my opinion, completely ridiculous. So with that said, let's go over this piece by piece to explain where they got it wrong. So, helmet. The best one, the one that they recommend, is Helm of the Stalwart Defender. It's a pretty good helm. It has a good amount of stamina, armor, defense, and even resilience to help you with your crit cap. It also requires a lot of money to make. It requires a Primal Nether. Those aren't going to be cheap. 12 Primal Mana, 22 Primal Earth, 8 Hardened Adamantite Bar. That's ridiculous. Or the best overall here, which doesn't match what's said in the text, by the way. Or the best overall, the Oathkeeper Helm. Less defense rating, less HP, slightly less armor. Not worth it. I mean, consider this. You have Oathkeeper, right? Well, Oathkeeper is decent, sure. But you also have Helm of the Righteous. It has a bit less spell damage, okay. Less stamina, less armor. But it's also a drop from Mechanar Normal, which isn't exactly hard. And crucially, the Helm of the Righteous gives you that 2-set, if you get it. 15% less mana. Now, if your concern is Fret as a Paladin tank, then getting that 2-set pre-raid is really, really good, right? I mean, it's not unreasonable to assume that you can get Helm of the Righteous pre-raid and to assume that Oathkeeper, which, by the way, getting the recipe of Oathkeeper is not a guarantee. I'm pretty sure it's a world drop. Yeah, like it even says it. It's a world drop for both of these. So your recommendation pre-raid is to hopefully find a blacksmith that's going to charge you, not charge you a fortune to make these. Yeah, good luck with that. When you have other options that are pretty reasonable. I mean, if you want to maximize your survivability, sure, you can get the Stalwart Defender, or you can get the dirt cheap option, which is Felsteel. The thing with Felsteel helmets, or Felsteel pieces in general, including legs and gloves, is that they will all be dirt cheap. They have high defense rating. They have gem sockets. They have high armor. They may not have as much stamina as some other pieces, but that doesn't matter. Every blacksmith that wants to maximize their blacksmithing skill, and pretty much all of them want to do that, all of the melee DPSers that are going to play the game will be getting blacksmithing pretty much. Well, the way they do that is through Felsteel. So what will happen is all the Felsteel armor pieces will be available on the auction house for nothing, because there will be too many of them. There's not enough tanks to buy all of these. And then, of course, you also have the quest reward of Myrmidon's Helmet, which has 37 stamina, meta gem, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend going for. Like, if you care about survival, get Felsteel, because getting that meta gem can be a bit tricky. And then there's also another ridiculous action here with the helm choices. The meta gem itself, 12 defense rating and 10% shield block value. Same with Myrmidon, pretty much same with all the helmets he has here. Why in the world would you go with that instead of the 18 stam meta gem? That's better for survivability. 10% block value, what, 20, 30 maybe? If you stack it, and you're not thinking straight if you're stacking block value. That's the thing, it's not worth it. The defense rating is not going to do much for you. The block value isn't going to do much for you. The stamina will. You're talking there 200 HP, easily. And what's with these runed living rubies? Beyond the fact that you don't need the fret, these are going to be ridiculously expensive. I mean, we're talking here easily over 100 gold, more likely 200, 300 gold initially. You want to spend your money on that? Don't bother. That's just foolish. Shoulders, Spalders of the Righteous, recommended pre-BiS. It's not necessarily a bad choice, gemming issues aside, it's not necessarily a bad choice. But Fanblade is better, because you need that crush cap, you need that avoidance, it's useful. The only situation where you'd use Spalders is if it's one of those pieces which you have to use in order to get your crush cap, to get your 2-set. That's the only kind of context. But it's better to get the gloves, for instance, for that 2-set bonus if you care about it, and work on Fanblade Spalders. Because Fanblade, because of its sockets, will give you the highest avoidance. Like as an individual piece, if you're not counting sockets, Spalders of Dementia probably give you more, right? Or thereabouts. But Fanblade does have those sockets and does have that socket bonus. Don't put spell damage. I mean, if you want the gem for a pure red gem, go dodge. though my recommendation would either be purple or orange. That's a more reasonable choice. Though not the worst decision in the world. Cloak, Devil Shark Cape, nothing really to talk here about except the Cloak enchant is laughable since it won't be in the game at launch. You can't put an enchant on a pre-raid best in slot list that doesn't exist at launch for phase 1 because it drops from Magister's Terrace. Chess piece, Breastplate of the Righteous. Okay, you can get decent stamina with that, though again the gemming is all over the place. Spell damage and stamina, defense rating, and enduring is fine, but the second bonus is just 2 MP5. That's worthless. And you're gonna sacrifice quite a bit of stamina actually for that bonus. Realistically though, although Breastplate is pretty fine and you can use it for the sake of threat, you really want Jade Skull Breastplate. It has a pretty good amount of stamina. You won't get as much as you would with Breastplate of the Righteous, and obviously you're losing the intellect, but you gain so much block rating. 23 block rating, that 5 defense rating, and 23 block rating is really useful for the sake of your crush cap. Initially, you're going to build your crush cap with the help of block rating. It's only later on with raid gearing that you can switch to dodge and parry, contributing a great deal to your crush cap. And so for an initial option, Jade Skull is absolutely the way to go. Bracers of Dignity are the recommended pre-raid BiS risk pieces due to its high stamina, defense, and spell power. Sure, okay. Very stamina. Bracers of the Green Fortress, 9 more stamina, and 10 dodge rating. Right? You can actually get Bracers of the Green Fortress, whereas Bracers of Dignity, they drop from Arcatraz Heroic. I've done Arcatraz Heroic on the beta. The boss that you drop from, Harbinger Scuris, is easily the hardest heroic boss in the game. And then there's another factor. There's another factor that has to be kept in mind. Shatar, with whom you require rep to enter that heroic, Shatar is one of the hardest reputations to actually grind to Revered. It's one of getting a group for Arcatraz Heroic might actually, or for any of those heroics, is probably going to be difficult initially. So this doesn't make sense at all. I mean, a more reasonable option, if you want to talk about reasonable options, the Amber Bands of the Aggressor, which drop from Warlord Califres, those are reasonable. Steam Vaults is not hard. Like, if you just want an easy item, easy to acquire, go for these. Though preferably, you would go for the Bracers of the Green Fortress because they are the pre-raid best in slot. The actual pre-raid best in slot. Not this nonsense. not this nonsense. Oh, we're going to kill the hardest boss in... hardest heroic boss in the game, pre-raid. Yeah, fantasy scenarios exist, I suppose. Hands, Gauntlets of Dissension. I don't really have much to say here, really. The gauntlets are actually good. They have a bit of avoidance due to the sake of the agility that they have. They're not from a very difficult heroic. Botanica hasn't been really difficult on the beta. Their reputation will hold you back, but outside of that's fine. Gauntlets of the Iron Tower, not really. Though I would recommend getting these eventually for the sake of resistance gearing, because the resilience and defense rating on these will help you for that. But actually getting these for the sake of tanking doesn't make sense when you have Felsteel. I mean, look at Felsteel compared to Gauntlets of the Iron Tower. The only difference is the resilience, which doesn't matter. Like, seriously. But Felsteel should be swapped in places with Gauntlets of the Iron Tower because it is better. Your biggest concern won't be defense cap initially, it will be crush capped. Spending this kind of gold on these Iron Tower gauntlets is nonsense. For what? Free more stamina and less armor? That doesn't make sense. Though you most reasonably can get the Gauntlets of the Righteous, you will want to run Shadow Holes quite a bit for the trinket from there, and you can get these and they are good. They're the best option to get the 2 set alongside the helmet. Moving on, Belt, Girdle of the Valorous Deeds. There isn't anything to comment in a negative way here in terms of the choice. That's the recommended pre-raid BiS, except it requires a heroic. And again, as I've stated, it's not reasonable to expect people will just go do all of this pre-raid, right? I mean, you're talking about you're talking about belt, you're talking about boots, you're talking about gloves. You're talking about bracers. You're talking about several heroic items, and some of them from very difficult heroics, some of the hardest in the game. And you're saying those are the options? Absolute nonsense. The second option is the one I actually dispute more though, because Girdle is pretty good. It gives you good amount of block rating, gives you defense rating. But the second option should be the Shatari Vindicator's Waist Guard. Because although it doesn't have the gem slots of Girdle of the Immovable, it has enough block rating that it will help you greatly towards your crush cap. And it certainly should be higher than Lionheart Girdle on this list. The options here below, they're just fine. Legs, nothing to comment here. All of them are pretty good options. I probably put leg plates of the Resolute Defender just because of that parry rating and agility as the second best choice. But outside of that, I can't comment, except on the stupid gem choices, but that's a theme with this guy. It's like, what are you thinking, really? Boots. Boots of the Righteous Path from Shattered Hulls Heroic. Because good threat, good stamina. Okay, so the best option pre-raid is Boots from Shattered Hulls, one of the hardest heroics in the game. The second option, and this is hilarious even, the second pre-raid option according to Wowhead is Eagle Crest War Boots. I just have to laugh because Blood Furnace Heroic is the hardest heroic in the game. And when I say it's the hardest, as I've talked in my top 5 heroic dungeons in Burning Crusade, it is a quantum leap in terms of difficulty, at least as it is right now. Maybe they nerf it, but it still will be a difficult heroic. And we're telling people, oh, you want to get gear for pre-raid for Karazhan, which is easier to handle, should be easier at least. You want to gear for pre-raid? Oh, you just have to do the hardest heroic in the game. Absolutely. And for the other items, the actual pre-raid best in slot is none of these. It's not Boots of the Righteous Path. It's not Eagle Crest. It's not Boots of the Colossus from Pandemonious Manitombs. Also a pretty tricky boss, by the way. It's hard not to laugh here. It's not Ascendant. It's the Flesh Beast Metal Greaves. Why? Because 28 dodge rating is fucking huge. That's why. It's immense. It really helps you out, especially early on when you are pushing really hard to get that crush cap, when you are struggling with that crush cap. And this is from a normal dungeon in Manitombs. This is something you will get while leveling. Yes, they don't have the highest amount of armor or stamina, but they have so much avoidance, and more than makes up for any deficiency these boots have. I'd use these until Karazhan. Unless I get unlucky in Karazhan, then maybe I would do that Blood Furnace, but only after clearing Karazhan once or twice. And then jewelry, necklace. This is foolish, really. Necklace of the Juggernaut, because it has high defense, stamina, and agility, and it's 0.76% dodge unbuffed. Okay, so it stacks with kings, it's worth something. Not worth it. And the problem I have here more so isn't necessarily with the necklace itself, though I think it's not worth getting those badges and spending them on that when you have other priorities. Yeah, you have other priorities. You have a trinket that you want to get. You have a shield that you want to get. You have a Libram, of course, above all else. Why waste your badges on this? Maybe later on? Sure, absolutely. But the actual pre-raid best in slot choice, the reasonable one, the one that you'd actually use, is Strength of the Untamed. All you need is Scenario Expedition Revered. It's not a hard faction to get revered with. The fact that it's so low on this list compared to the Charm, the Battle Chain, the Steam Hinge Chain of Valor is ridiculous. Though maybe you can use the Steam Hinge if you're absolutely interested in pre-raid, but you're going to get more in terms of avoidance from Strength of the Untamed. Why would you go with Necklace of the Juggernaut, which doesn't necessarily give you more avoidance, than Strength of the Untamed, which is much easier and cheaper to acquire? That doesn't make sense at all. And then we're moving on to rings. Band of the Impenetrable Darkness. A ring that's probably going to go for several thousand golds on the auction house and isn't even the pre-raid best in slot option. Elemential Band of the Sentry, can't complain about that. The wording is here is weird, but yeah, spell power is good on rings. But the actual best in slot is all the way down here. Endormus here. This doesn't have any stamina or armor, but it has a crap ton of dodge and a bit of block. This is very powerful for the sake of getting Crush Cap. You should always get it, even if you're not going to use it that much later down the line. But early on, it really, really helps you out. These items are essential. These kind of items are essential for helping you get to your Crush Cap. Trinkets. And here all he says is Brooch of the Immortal King, Adamantite Figurine, and the Berries Enigma. Okay, the actual pre-raid best in slot trinket is... I don't think it's even... Okay, sorry. It's Figurine of the Cause there. I missed it for a second. Shadow Holes, normal. This is a lot. In point of fact, this isn't even the best in slot pre-raid. The best in slot pre-raid is all the way down here. Styline's Impending Scarab. Why is Styline the best? It has good defense, it has N24 block rating. It doesn't have as much block value as Figurine, but because of that defense rating, it actually helps you more towards your Crush Cap than Figurine does. Maybe you can use both of them, cheat, get rid of the ring, so you don't need to use Endormus here. Those are the kind of options you have available. Adamantite Figurine is good. The Berries Enigma, don't bother with it. Like, genuinely, don't bother with it. You can work with the Adamantite Figurine. Maybe the Berry if you don't get it to drop. I've done plenty of Shadow Labyrinth on the beta. I haven't seen this drop once, so that's a bit of a problem. Brooch of the Immortal King, that's from Tarek. And getting that from the daily quest, the Skyguard daily quests, can be tricky. Pre-raid, obviously. What I don't understand is, okay, Darkmoon cards are top of the line. You won't get these pre-raid. But why is Glyph of Deflection, which only has 12 block ratings, so high up the value? And it's a block value trinket. Why is Gnomergon auto blockers? Like, epic items are not better than fucking blue items just because they're epic. They need to have the right stats for it. If we were talking about warrior, maybe I would believe this, and I would dispute it even as a warrior tank. Really. Because there are better options to use. Hell, Regal Protectorate is better. And that's from a quest in Hellfire. So yeah, nonsense, non-stop nonsense, over and over and over again. Weapon. Gavel, so far, is the best in slot weapon pre-raid on the beta. And beyond that, threat-wise, pure threat-wise, Blade of Dark Mage or Stormcaller. The fact you have Honor Call and Warbringer, it's like, and Blade of Wizardry, it's like, what are you doing here? Really, it's like, epic items are above blue items. That's what it feels like here. Not really, unless they're vanilla items, but clearly. The actual reasonable pre-raid option, if you can get it, is Crystal Forged Sword. Chances are you won't be able to get it. Continuum Blade is really the logical one. Continuum Blade doesn't have the block rating of Crystal Forged Sword, and we don't even know really. I mean, Orgrimmar is available in the beta, but will it be available on launch? That's the question. If it's available on launch and you can get Crystal Forged Sword, yes, you won't do as much threat as Gavel, but guess what? You won't need that threat. Threat is fine. Again, I repeat myself what I've said. Threat on the beta is fine. If it ends up an issue, maybe then get Gavel. Maybe. But Crystal Forged Sword will help you with your pre-raid gearing if it becomes available. But that's the big question. You might pay a arm and a leg to buy this depleted sword. You certainly won't get it on your own. So that's also another thing to take into consideration here when it comes down to it. Libram, nothing to say here. Choices are solid. Libram of Repentance is the one you want, and for threat you want Libram of Eternal Rest. Shields. Crest of the Shatar. Crest of the Shatar pre-raid. Best in slot. No. I'm sorry. Absolutely not. The reason it's not is, yes, it has those 2 gem sockets. Yes, you get a bit of dodge rating from that. Okay, but look at the Zur Shield of the Caldara. It has 2k more armor, and yes, it does have 12 less stamina if you put 2 stamina gems in Crest of the Shatar. Sure. But it has more defense as well. It's a worthy trade-off to get that 200 armor versus Crest of the Shatar, even if you're losing. And it's less expensive as well. In terms of blue shields, reasonable options. Personally, I would rate the Platinum Shield of the Valorous higher than most other things, though obviously the Agrella Aegis is really solid in its own right. Though there is one missing from the Netherwing quest, and that is going over the pre-raid options. Still insane. Putting an item that drops from Blood Furnace, even if it's not your pick, is ridiculous. Putting bracers that are from Alcatraz heroic is ridiculous. Putting boots from Shatterhold's heroic is nonsensical. And again and again and again we see random choices, no real thought put into it, about the cohesive gear set and about having overall good stats. Some of these choices are fine. They're good pieces. They're not bad pieces. But the overall thought process just isn't there. And that's the problem. Moving on to raid gearing, the pieces are fine until you get to the bracers. The choices are fine. Some of the lesser options are not necessarily the best, but the best in slot ones are fine. But bracer-wise, you have bracers of dignity. Again, you have that focus of threat over survivability. It's nonsensical. It's bad. You shouldn't do it. The only thing that really annoys me, though, it's like if you're going to go for frag gearing, okay, fine, you'd use dignity. If you are understanding that logic. But the thing is, why are ram braces of courage higher than bracers of the Green Fortress? Green Fortress are more valuable. You care about the dodge. You care about the crush cap. Why throw ram braces for over Green Fortress? That doesn't make sense. Warriors want ram braces. You do not. You want Green Fortress. Moving on, however, and this is where it genuinely started hurting my brain the first time I recorded this. And by the time I was done with this list the first time around, it got my blood boiling. Like, it really did. Like, there are many lists out on the internet that are much better than this. Justicar Handguards. Justicar Handguards are the recommended phase 1 best in slot gauntlets due to its high stamina, spell power, and defense. Except they don't have high stamina and defense. Justicar Handguards don't have as much stamina as Iron Gauntlets of the Maiden. And while Iron Gauntlets of the Maiden may have less defense rating, they also have 2 gem sockets. Though again, he's throwing away the gem socket bonus by putting in bad gems. So instead of taking full advantage of it, he throws in crap in this. Doesn't know what he's doing, quite frankly, at this stage. When it comes to this, you wouldn't put these kind of gems. Unless you literally needed that block rating, or you needed some extra defense, some extra avoidance, you would just go pure stamina on these. And the second thing is with the gauntlets, if you care so much about threat, you don't get Justicar Handguards. A couple of reasons. Shamans actually want the tier 4 gloves, because they need the set bonus. You don't. You don't need the 4 set bonus at all. Holy shield damage 15% is not going to matter that much. And if you're caring about threat, Gauntlets of the Righteous, getting Gauntlets of the Righteous, getting that 2 set is a lot more important for the sake of your threat. Because Consecration, if you have threat issues, you likely have mana issues. If you have mana issues, you want that Consecration cost reduction. It is important to understand that. So you might want to keep on the Gauntlets of the Righteous. Don't get Justicar Handguards. It's a bad idea. It's a waste of gold to enchant them. Belt, Girdle of the Valorous Deeds. It's still best because it has 22 intellect. No. You don't care about that. Yes, higher mana pool can be beneficial in some ways, but to pick Girdle because of mana over Crimson, Girdle of the Indomitable, not a good idea. The only reason you'd pick Girdle of Valorous Deeds is because, yes, you lose the 2 gem sockets, but you gain 20 spell power. So it can be worth it from the sake of a threat perspective, especially because you're not really losing that much in terms of crush cap versus Crimson Girdle. That's the reason you might want to go with Girdle of Valorous Deeds. But Crimson Girdle is absolutely the survival choice. Though not with 2 spell damage. You're throwing away a good belt that's best in slot in terms of survivability by putting in 2 spell damage gems in it. Instead, these should be stamina gems, maybe avoidance gems, maybe a mix of that if you care to maybe get the socket bonus, maybe if you need a bit more avoidance, not too much, maybe then, but not spell damage. That's silly. Going down, Justicar Lead Guards, flat no. Simply put, the tier 4 legs are bad for everyone except rogues. of the tokens you share, that is, of the tokens of the people who have the same token as you. Don't bother. Get Rin Dynasty leggings, and if you don't get them, still keep using Time Wardens. And certainly don't put spell damage gem or these kind of gems in Rin. You're wasting Rin, actually. Rin will give you more defense and dodge rating than Time Wardens. You want stamina in these, not this ridiculous mix of gems. And you don't want Justicar, plain and simple. They might not look so bad, but losing those 3 gem sockets is a significant loss versus Rin. He even mentions it, right? He even mentions this situation, right? If itemizing for survivability over threat, yeah, you want to itemize for survivability over threat. Plain and simple. Boots of the Righteous Path. Okay, continuing down the threat perspective. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is he puts Boots of Illusion over Battle Scar. What's the problem? And he then puts 2 silly gems in Battle Scar. Yeah, great way to waste Battle Scar. The reason you would use Battle Scar over Boots of Illusion, yes, Illusion gives you higher avoidance, which can be useful. By this point, if you have Tier Helm, if you have Maiden Gloves, if you have Tier Shoulders, if you have Tier Chest, all that kind of stuff, you will have enough avoidance to be able to drop, to be able to be crush capped without these kind of boots. So you can get Battle Scar for the sake of the higher stamina that you would be able to get from them. Boots of the Righteous Path aren't the worst option in the world. To be clear, to use at this particular stage, you can make do with boots that don't have 2 gem sockets, but Battle Scar are absolutely the way to go if you want to maximize your survivability, and they should be rated higher than Boots of Illusion over here. Jewelry, nothing really, nothing really to comment except the neck. No, you would not use the Brooch of Unquenchable Fury for the sake of threat. It's weird, like its spell hit is important. Spell hit isn't important. Your main threat generation is from Consecration. Consecration cannot miss. That's the thing about it. That's why this list is so silly. There's no understanding of the actual gearing priorities of Paladins. Like, even for the purpose of threat, I would not go with this gear that he recommends. Rings. Okay, the best defensive Violet Signet of the Great Protector, but this is where it gets silly. The best threat he calls the Band of the Crimson Fury from McFerrin's head. Now here's the thing, 2 things about McFerrin's head. 1, some people actually do need it for the sake of their raid best in slot. You don't. As I've stated before, you do not need spell hit. You have 3% from talents. You can make do without any, because it doesn't matter that much for you for the sake of your threat generation, because your spells won't miss or resist that much by default. And here's the best part. This can be tricky to gain. There is a ring very similar to this from the first boss. How can you make a BiS list and miss the Spectral Band of Innervation that drops from Atumen, the Huntsman, the literal first boss of Karazhan, that no one really wants? It has a good amount of stamina though, intellect, spell damage. It's about exactly the same as the McFerrin had one. It just doesn't have spell hit, which you do not care about. How can you omit these kind of items? That's the thing that gets to me. That really got my blood boiling. There's also a blue ring, I forget its name, that's pretty decent in terms of spell damage. Trinkets. And this is where it's just plain silly. The cherry on the cake for 2 reasons. So Moreau's Lucky Pocket Watch. Okay, Moreau's is the best defensive. It's really good to use. You can probably get away with 2 stamina trinkets at this point, or a stamina trinket and a threat trinket, but Eye of McFerrin as the best recommended threat trinket due to high spell power and powerful passive? No. Because a fair amount of spells will resist frequently? No. Again, your main threat ability is Consecration. Like, really, this is not how it works. For 2 reasons. You can't, for 2 big reasons. You're relying on a resist, which won't happen that frequently, to get this effect that only lasts 10 seconds. So you don't have any control when that threat is going to happen. having control over your fret is actually an important part of tanking. It's more important to do burst fret or fret at specific points of a fight than just a random fret boost at a certain point. You're counting on something bad happening to you for you to gain a fret boost? That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. And I'm trying absolutely hard to not be toxic here, but it's just stupid. I'm sorry, it's just stupid to think like this. And the worst part, the actual worst part, isn't even that. It's also the fact that there is a better trinket available. That if you look at this list, you have a selection of trinkets, many trinkets in the game, but there is one missing. That's the actual best in slot trinket in phase 1 in the game. That's available from the Badge of Justice vendor. The icon of the Silver Crescent. 43 spell damage, 155 spell damage and healing. This is the best in slots caster trinket in the game with the exception of the Darkmoon card. How can you, as someone who is in the beta, and I literally am addressing this to the guy who wrote the guide, how can you miss this? Did you even bother looking at the badge vendor? Did you even look at the loot tables of things? Or did you just pick up whatever fucking items you could find and throw them together in a list? Because that's absolutely how this feels like. It's just, honestly, lazy. That's really how it feels to me. Lazy. To see this guide on the Wowhead page when you omit something like this from the badge vendor, it is lazy. Plain and simple. To have Eye of Macferidan. Laughable. Just laughable. Weapons. Bloodmaw Magus Blade is a recommended due to its high spell power and stamina. What high stamina? Gavel has more stamina. Continuum Blade has more stamina. Crystal Forge has more stamina. Bloodmaw is the best weapon because it has the highest spell damage. Sure, but you are sacrificing that stamina for that. But that's not even it. There is a better weapon. Gladiator's Gavel. Now, to be clear, we don't know if we can get this. We don't know what requirements it will have. Maybe you just need arena points. You can farm them on your own, all that kind of stuff. Maybe Bloodmaw is a lot easier to get. Maybe not. Right? Depends on your luck. But to throw Bloodmaw, which has less stamina, even less intellect, and only 4 more spell power as the best weapon, when clearly Gladiator's Gavel is the best in slot tanking weapon? Silly. Just ridiculous. And then moving on, Librams are fine. At least he got that right. Aldori Legacy Defender. Okay. All good. All fine. Solid choices. He puts Azure Shield of the Kalara below Crest of Shatar. The only issue I have here is he's missing a spell power shield. There are some available. They are pretty decent. And if you're so interested in Fret, you would probably want to switch to spell power shield, at least on some packs of trash. And then there's also the mission of this cloak that, I just randomly clicked on earlier. This is the best in slot Fret cloak in the game for Paladin. Sure, it doesn't have any kind of survivability, but it has a lot of holy spell damage. This might be the first item that you swap when you just want to go balls to the wall in terms of Fret. And it's not on the list. All the cloaks are survival cloaks. There is no Fret cloak. And you can swap your cloak. Just as you can swap your rings, you can swap your neck. He has a neck on the list, but he doesn't have a cloak. He has a ridiculous trinket on the list, but he doesn't have icon. This list is nonsensical. It doesn't work. It has a bunch of items randomly picked without proper research. There are many guides out there that do a much better job. I have in the link of the description of this video several lists. Now, you don't necessarily need to follow my list. There are many other lists that people have made on the internet that are much better than what Wowhead has been able to put together. Now, I want to conclude with this. I don't think this is on Wowhead, to be clear. I think that it can be tricky finding people that are willing to put the work, do the research, all that. But if you're the kind of person who gets selected, who has those connections, who does get picked, who does work on these guides, who make these guides, you at least owe the audience some basic effort on your part, especially since you're in the beta. You owe the audience that's gonna look at these lists some degree of actual research, instead of missing obvious things like Icon, like Drape of the Righteous. How he did that, I don't know. It's really beyond me. I was so pissed the first time around when I was looking at this list. I was literally yelling at my screen because it's just silly. And because it is a list on Wowhead with all that goes into it. It's the front page on the internet for World of Warcraft along with MMO Champion. And they are getting a lot of criticism for these lists because they are bad. Some of them aren't. The Prot Warrior one is fine. Not as good as it could have been, but you can use that. It's a functional list. It actually goes over the things and it goes over details. It tells you what kind of items you would want to use and why. It also covers some things from vanilla. This just throws a bunch of random items together and just like, oh yeah, make a gear list with this. Create a character with this. It doesn't work like that. It ends up being a clusterfuck. And that's what it is. It's a clusterfuck. And they should have known better than that, to be honest. The people actually making these lists. It's not like the information isn't out there. It's not like there aren't people willing to talk about it. The guy who made this list is in Lights Club. Lights Club is the Paladin Discord for TBC. I'm part of it. There are other people part of it that have the experience, that have the understanding. If that's the thing that kind of annoys me about it all the same, is they could have asked more experienced players, or they could have found those lists. The information is out there. It does exist. It's on YouTube. It's on Google search. You do a Google search. You can do a Google search to find those lists. Sure, maybe they're incomplete. Maybe they're lacking items. Maybe they're considering pre-2.1. There's a lot of problems with the lists that even exist out there. But that list is by far the worst Prop Paladin pre-raid list and Tier 4 list that I have actually seen. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video. And if you are actually interested in gearing your Prop Paladin, do not follow the Wowhead pre-raid or Tier 4 guide. They're bad.